everyone. Thank you so much for watching another episode of the Weaviate podcast. I'm super excited to welcome Lakshya Agrawal, a PhD student at UC Berkeley. Lakshya is the lead author of GEPA, the newest optimizer in DSPy's collection of language models as optimizers, and this whole space of optimizing compound AI systems, agentic systems. And I'm just so excited to dive into these things further. Lakshya, thank you so much for joining the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me here, Connor. It's really great to talk to you about GEPA today.
Awesome. So I'd love to kind of kick this off by understanding your research journey. I love just kind of understanding the meta around what led you to be working on this project.
Sure. Basically, traditional learning techniques like reinforcement learning and fine-tuning have shown tremendous progress in domains where there is a lot of abundant data available or where rollouts are easy to access. I was working on a code generation project where I wanted to generate code for a new hardware architecture where every evaluation loop needed me to run the generated code on the hardware device. But this is very slow because I need to compile for this new hardware and then execute on it. And therefore, collecting large amounts of data was not feasible. Also, this was a domain where there was no pre-training knowledge available. So this raises the natural question of how do you optimize an AI system in domains where rollouts are very slow? Reinforcement learning and fine tuning is very sample inefficient, where it requires the model to generate a large amounts of rollouts and then gather scalar learning signals from them and then optimize the weights accordingly. However, in my domain, what I also found is that almost any AI system built around large language models uses a lot of generates a lot of natural language traces that explicitly show what's the reasoning process being used by the model, what is the model's interaction with the environment. Maybe there are compiler error messages, there may be profiler information, and so on. So what I found is that language models already have built a lot of prior knowledge about all of these. For example, language models are well aware of what are the different kinds of code optimization techniques, for example, and as language models are getting better, they're also improving in their ability to reflect on their own past mistakes. So what this meant is that we can extract much more learning signal from even one rollout where we explicitly see what was the model's reasoning trajectory. Did it fail to interact with the environment in some way? Did the environment provide any meaningful feedback in the form of error messages or any other kind of feedback? And we can use all of this natural language information to make the LLM itself reflect on its mistakes and improve its own performance on this particular task. So basically, the sample inefficiency is what motivated GEPA.
Amazing. Oh, I heard you just switched it to Jeff. I've seen some I've seen some tweets about it's not a new like work from Omar if there isn't some uncertainty in how you pronounce it. I saw Christopher Potts had tweeted that. But is it Gefa or is it Jeffa?
It's actually really fun. So internally, we have always been calling it JEPA. And I'm very grateful to Professor Jan LeCun. Actually, he christened it as GEPA, but I believe I'll continue to call it JEPA because that's what we have been using internally for all of this time.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah. Well, sorry to our audience to be distracted by that, but yeah. So I definitely want to pick apart, yeah, this kind of sample efficiency. This is something when I heard Matej Zaharia presenting it at the Berkeley Agentic AI Summit, he really emphasizes kind of sample efficiency for learning to complete a task where the rollouts are really expensive. Maybe if we could just kind of like set the stage for our listeners a little more on this kind of feedback from the metric and kind of explaining why this is new for DSPy, why this is new for kind of language models as optimizers, and just generally this idea of the metric not only gives you a scalar reward, but it also gives you some natural language about what happened with it. And I think that's just such a profound evolution in optimization. If we could just maybe zoom into that a little further.
Got it. So, basically, when we look at AI optimization techniques like fine tuning or reinforcement learning, what we see is that almost all of these algorithms are built around a scalar reward. The AI system or LLM or the model agent, whatever, it generates one complete trajectory going from the input to the output. And in the intermediate, it can invoke many expensive tool calls, which can be things like even running entire simulations, which can take a very long time, for example, or in the example that I was taking, compiling and then running it on a completely new hardware architecture, which is again like a very long running process. So the AI system needs to first generate a complete rollout, at the end of which an evaluation system will go through a series of steps to actually evaluate the output. For example, in a code generation pipeline, we have first there is a parser that will parse the code, then there's a compiler that will compile it, then we have the runtime that will actually execute it, and then there is a profiler that will profile how fast or slow the code is running, how much memory it is consuming, and so on. So there are these series of steps, and at each step, especially in AI systems built around LLMs, we find that there are a lot of textual traces at every step involved. And even like any kind of evaluation mechanism for these LLM based pipelines, like even if you look at something like instruction following, they have an explicit set of rubrics that did the did the output mention this particular word? How long is the output? Did the output mention like did the output capture all of these particular insights, and so on? So what I'm trying to say is that there are a lot of natural language traces as well as rubrics involved in the operation as well as evaluation of any LLM based pipeline. And what we find is that simply letting the language model know, or just making the language model aware of what all are the traces it is processing, how it is being graded, gives the language model the ability to reflect on what went well there, during the rollout, what did not go well, and leveraging all of the world knowledge that the language models have already baked in. It can also think about how to improve based on this particular feedback. For example, if I in the instruction following case, if I say that the feedback is you pass the following rubric, which is you mentioned the following keyword, however your response was too long, then the language model knows that okay, in next time it needs to generate shorter responses. Or if a compiler error message says that I cannot find the symbol X, perhaps you meant Y. And these are the typical compiler error messages that we do see. The language model already knows that, okay, X is not an API name in the library that I'm working with, but Y is a valid API name. Next time I should try this. So, what we are saying is that uh, earlier, in earlier paradigms, you would generate a very lengthy trajectory, and then you will get one scalar reward. And to extract meaningful signal out of this, you will need to compare it against other trajectories where sometimes you will make the mistake, sometimes you will get the answer correct, and so on. However, now because LLMs are getting better at reflection, and because almost all of the components of the system are operating over natural language traces, we can actually now let the LLM see all of this natural language information in the form of feedback, and then it can improve itself based on that.
Yeah, it's so exciting. And I guess like if we could just step into like sort of maybe using LM as judge as metric feedback, like say I imagine like a common thing is people build these, agentic pipelines that say summarize your emails or summarize your LinkedIn feed, and then take your new blog post or this kind of thing where you're personalizing messages for your customers, or all this kind of stuff. And so say you have LM as judge giving that feedback, like I rate your summary of my LinkedIn feed 4 out of 5, and here's particularly why. Are you looking into that kind of angle as well? Like I understand there's quite a lot of work around using the compiler, and I think it's called like verifiable rewards. Is my understanding of this kind of like you have such a concrete signal that comes back. What do you think about more open ended that kind of thing?
So, first, I would say in the paper itself, we do experiment with LLM as a judge with the PUPA task, which is basically given access to a trusted and untrusted LLM and given a prompt. We want to rewrite the prompt to be run with the untrusted LLM so that it removes all the privacy information, but maintains the quality of the response as well. So here, like we use LLM as a judge to judge the quality of the response. And for the feedback, also we use this LLM as a judge response as the feedback metric in the pipeline itself. And as we can see in the paper's results, we already see GEPA improving a lot with this. I would say there is a lot of very recent work on building better rubrics with LLM as a judge, which I think is very exciting space, and I believe GEPA should be able to leverage that as well. However, beyond the PUPA experiment, we currently haven't run that for GEPA, but I believe that it should be possible. Yes.
Yeah, it's so cool. Like some podcasts we've done is with Anand Kanapan from Patronus AI and Leonard Tang from Hayes Labs, and they're doing all this interesting stuff around LM as judge. And I could just imagine how these two worlds intersect, where now you have all this feedback from the judge coming back into the optimizer, and it's just such a cool evolution of this. And yeah, if we could maybe just sort of again, sort of like kind of intro to the podcast, setting the stage a little more on the evolution with GEPA. So kind of like with DSPy's optimizers, we started off with this sort of like bootstrap few shot. We're generating few shot examples from your training data, even though you don't already have examples. Then we had OPRO, which is kind of like this evolutionary optimization of the prompts, where the only signal you had was the prompts and then the score that they receive, and that's what you're using to propose a new prompt. And then we had MIPRO, which is doing this like joint optimization of instructions as well as examples and trying to find that combination of the right instruction with the right set of examples. And so now with GEPA, I guess I'm just curious about maybe sort of how you see it, like maybe the inspiration it takes from the predecessors. And then I also noticed there are some new optimizers coming out, like the GRPO and the RL algorithms are now integrated with DSPy and say the Simba algorithm. So maybe if you wouldn't mind just kind of like contextualizing the space a little bit more and just kind of explaining the status of where these things are at.
Definitely. So I would say definitely JEPA has taken a lot of inspiration from all of the wonderful things that have been happening in the compound AI system optimization space. A lot of the techniques proposed within DSPy, like Bootstrap Fuchsia, Topro, Mipro, Simba, and so on. What I would say is that one of the traditional technique that we have been using for compound AI system optimization is few shot demonstration, where we either use the LLM itself to generate a few trajectories and select high performing trajectories to be used as demonstrations, after which we identify which demonstrations work best. This is how Mipro and Bootstrap Fuchsia both work. Um, we notice a shift in JEPA where earlier LLMs could not actually reflect that well on their trajectories and extract meaningful insights or lessons or generalizable rules that can be added in the prompt itself. But now we are seeing that as LLMs are getting better, they can also reflect on their own entire trajectories and extract like lessons that can be incorporated into the prompt. So uh, I believe that this is like the one shift that has happened from the traditional optimizers. I would definitely highlight that Mipro already was proposing instructions using the LLM itself, but the other component that JEPA builds upon on top of Mipro is the iterative refinement process, where given one, so starting from the base program candidate, the base prompt, we go through one round of optimization where we propose a new prompt. But now we use the second prompt to actually identify what the mistakes are in this one, and then go to a third one. So basically, we replace the Bayesian search with an evolutionary search process here. So I would say that's and this has mostly been enabled, as I said, because of the improving reflective capabilities of the LLMs. So yeah.
Yeah, maybe now we could. I had some more questions kind of about wanting to pick apart the reflective prompt mutation a bit further, but I think it would be great to maybe set the context for the entire GEPA algorithm and maybe also now talk about this Pareto-Optimal Candidate Selection and this tree structured lineage of candidates. Such an interesting idea. Yeah, would you mind just kind of taking the mic and explaining how that works?
Sure. So overall, JEPA is an iterative algorithm where it maintains a it maintains a pool of candidates and tracks the score of every candidate on every validation instance. At every loop of GEPA, GEPA proposes one new candidate, does a mini batch evaluation to see whether this new candidate improves on this mini batch or not. And if it does improve on that mini batch, then GEPA tracks the score for this new candidate on all of the validation instances and continues on with the iterations. Currently, GEPA provides two ways to propose new candidates. One is the reflective mutation, and the other is merge. Reflective mutation is simply that we will take the candidate, we will run up to like 3 or 4 rollouts with this candidate on some data instances, and we will gather all of like the inputs, outputs, and the feedback metric, whatever the user has provided. And we will provide this to an LLM to reflect on what went well, what did not go well, what can be improved, after which it proposes a new instruction. And then we test this new instruction on the mini batch and then track the candidate on the whole set. The system aware merge is basically as we run JEPA for longer, we see that a evolutionary tree appears where different lineages can have different insights gathered into them. So system aware merge simply tries to merge two different lineages to encapsulate the insights gathered in them into a single candidate. And again, like after merging them, we see whether it improved or not, and then we repeat this process. So that's the overall loop. One thing I would like to highlight is that the way we select the candidate itself to improve upon in the next iteration has a huge impact on the final performance. For example, a very standard strategy that can be adopted is that at every iteration, we select the currently best performing prompt on the aggregate and we try to improve upon this candidate. However, what we found is that often this gets stuck in a local optimum, and like the model will propose one new instruction, maybe 2 rounds of instruction, but then after that it's not able to improve upon this candidate itself. Instead, we introduce a Pareto based candidate sampling strategy where the insight is that the problem space represented by the validation set has many different kinds of tasks in them, each of which may require a slightly different insight to work with. And JEPA tries to discover these insights using the evolutionary search process. However, what happens is that a new candidate program that has been generated may have an insight to solve task instance one, but may not work as well on some of the other task instances. But since it's working so well on task instance one, we definitely want to preserve all of the insights or the insightful nuggets that this candidate has gathered so far. So, what JEPA proposes is that we will track the best performing candidates on each of the data instance available in the training and validation dataset, and we will stochastically select any of these candidates for reflective mutation. This way, we can ensure that any insight that the LLMs have captured about the problem space remains within the candidate pool so that we can either build upon that in further reflective mutation or we can merge it in the next iterations. So that's the overall JEPA loop.
That's amazing. There's just so many cool ideas with that. I think well, if I kind of something you just said that really resonated with me was talking about this sort of learn something for task one. And so, I mean, generally, this idea of or tasks, or is it correct that tasks and data samples are sort of used interchangeably? Like you view it the same way. Like you have 20 training samples. These are like tasks.
Yes, yes. I think there's some confusion in the terminology there. Apologies. But yeah, task and data samples are the same.
Yeah, so like this idea of constructing a Pareto frontier where like one candidate is the best on one of your training samples out of your 20, and therefore it's an interesting candidate. And so it kind of motivates me. I think for me, one of the most interesting aspects of this is how domain specific knowledge gets encoded into the system in this way. And say we're optimizing a query writer and it's for answering questions about Weaviate, and they're like, these particular terms it needs to learn. And this is, I had an interesting discussion with this with Amanpreet Singh from Contextual AI, where he was kind of in the camp that you're going to have to encode these into this knowledge into the weights of the neural network. You're not going to be able to just kind of put it in the prompt. But this kind of on task one, maybe it had some question about what is hybrid search, and it adds something to the prompt about hybrid search, what it is, particularly it's combining vector search and keyword search, but like this kind of particular knowledge. And so I guess I wanted to just sort of pick your brain about and I want to come back to this kind of Pareto optimal thing more broadly, but I'm just so inspired by wanting to know what you think about this sort of encoding domain specific knowledge into these systems and how this sort of like training distribution coverage thing helps with it. And yeah.
Got it. So, one thing I would definitely say is that uh, one of the things we have, like, LLMs keep improving all the time. They get better at instruction following, they get better at generalizing to new tasks. And what we are seeing is that uh, a lot of the real world tasks are actually about capturing domain specific information that for this particular query, this is how it should be handled. If the query mentioned this particular keyword, you should make a search query following this particular rule, and so on. So there's a lot of domain specific knowledge that already exists, and LLMs have probably seen some form of that already in their vast pre-training corpora. And I believe that the task is more to extract this domain specific knowledge and incorporate that in the prompt. From a system efficiency perspective, I can definitely agree that once such a domain specific insight has been found, it should definitely be encoded into the weights of the model itself for efficiency purposes and for further generalization. And for this, we have actually been working on a very similar direction where if you look at the recent paper MMGRPO, we propose a technique where we first run a prompt optimization loop to extract all of these insights, and then we run an RL loop after the on the prompt optimized program to actually encode all of these insights into the model's weight. And we also see that this boosts the performance further ahead, both achievable from prompt optimization or RL alone, because once the model has discovered those domain specific insights, it can generate better rollouts and better trajectories to then optimize itself better. So yeah.
Yeah, that's a cool one. How you have the that kind of teacher student leading, or like that kind of gradient steps ahead to produce the rollouts. Yeah, that's such an interesting topic. I think generally of just kind of like understanding how you encode domain specific knowledge in the prompt as well as the weights, and just kind of keeping an eye on how that space is evolving. So yeah, I kind of want to maybe just step back into the Pareto optimal candidate selection. I was really excited to read in the paper that you were citing Map Elites, and Map Elites is this work from Jeff Clune and Kenneth Stanley and Joel Lehman, that group on this kind of open-ended AI, and it was one of my favorite research areas generally. And so I was just so excited to see that connection. And maybe I think quality diversity algorithms also have this kind of AI feedback. So maybe if we could just talk a bit about like this kind of exploration problem in AI broadly, and then maybe how these ideas are, yeah, and then connect these ideas.
So, map elites is one of the diversity-inducing search algorithms where the base hypothesis is that the solution space is very diverse, and each solution can take a very different form, and we can try to encode the how the solution looks, and each of these different types of solution may work well for different kinds of problem instances, and they highlight something special about how to explore this problem space. So the way GEPA tries to use the way GEPA is inspired by map elites is that it uh, uses the validation set to where each instance in the validation set encodes how what domain specific insights are required to solve that particular problem. And by tracking the best performing candidate on each of these validation instances, JEPA can maintain all the domain specific insights that solve any of these problems. And therefore, if we simply there is an exploration exploitation trade-off that JEPA has to solve when doing the search. And the way JEPA answers this is it focuses itself only on the candidates that perform well on at least one of the task instances, therefore reducing the large, therefore focusing the search space, but also ensuring that we capture all the domain specific insights. So um, yeah, that's how GEPA is doing the exploration exploitation trade-off.
Yeah, amazing. I think like it definitely inspires me thinking about like expanding this from say the Pareto frontier is performing the best on one of your samples, and you have to enumerate across your entire set to maybe you have some kind of vector that's encoding the whole domain, and that maybe is one way I'm thinking about how you just this kind of idea of encoding the diversity of your samples. And I guess maybe just taking a bit of a detour, this kind of idea of diversity in AI, creativity in AI is so exciting to me. At Weaviate, we're definitely a little biased by I love the use of vector embeddings for this, and I've always loved this like topic modeling and this kind of like cluster visualization. I'm just so curious what kind of things can emerge out of it. So I think this kind of idea of having like the visualization of the space and using that to kind of motivate diverse exploration. But then I guess you also have this sort of like you flatten it and then you make it 3D because you're looking at like the performance as well as the kind of diversity plotted. And it's just this kind of diversity thing is just amazing. And I really like the tree lineage and that training data distribution. Maybe one other idea I wanted to talk about was kind of early with the researchers who had developed map elites. They also had this paired open-ended trailblazers where they're simultaneously they have candidates of bipedal walking agents and then they have the environment is like the terrain that they're walking on, and they're co-evolving the environment with the solutions. And so I think with GEPA, maybe you could have something where you're synthesizing, I guess, kind of like with DSPy, this kind of origins and bootstrap, few shot and bootstrapping examples. You can maybe co-evolve the training data set as well as this frontier, and that's maybe something I think would be interesting for people who don't already have like a training data set. That's maybe something I would, yeah.
I definitely think there is a lot of potential there because, as mentioned, like LLMs have a lot of prior like world knowledge encoding in them. As we use JEPA to generate different prompt candidates, we see the different aspects of each problem also being becoming explicit. And I definitely believe that this can be captured into curating training data for further tuning of LLMs. Yes.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, I just love that. That kind of, I mean, I kind of started like my first introduction to deep learning research was data augmentation. My advisor was just like, go learn as much as you can about data augmentation. And so I've just like always been really interested in that topic. And especially like back when I started, it was about using generative adversarial networks. And there was like, maybe we can synthesize new images that way. But I love this kind of LLMs and that kind of idea. Also, I definitely want to dive further into the experiments in the paper and just sort of the methodology and all these kind of details. But I think maybe just kind of rounding out the sort of like algorithmic foundation, I'd love to talk about GEPA as an inference time search strategy, and is such like this kind of scaling test time compute. Just what comes to your mind when you think about that?
Definitely. So, one of the primary ways that JEPA operates is by creating a lot of diversity in the prompt space itself. So traditionally, when like a lot of the initial inference time compute strategies were basically generating a lot of candidates using the LLM by like simply sampling many trajectories at a high temperature, and then either using a verifiable domain like a verifier, or even using LLM itself to pick one of the best ones and then use that candidate. However, we find that due to the way JEPA operates, where it's doing the Pareto candidate tracking and it's doing reflective mutation, we find that JEPA is itself inducing a huge amount of diversity in the kinds of solutions that it generates. So, given a batch of tasks that we want to solve, and given some budget that we can expend to solve it, and especially in domains where there is a verifier, but also now with LLM as a judge, JEPA can simply, like, if you simply pass the validation set as the train set itself, then JEPA can, like, propose and update its own strategy to solve that particular task iteratively till that task is solved. And we find this to work really well for code optimization domains. So specifically in the paper, we show that GEPA can be used to generate optimized kernels for AMD's NPU hardware, which is like a very novel hardware architecture without any pre-training knowledge because of how novel the architecture is. But also for CUDA, we show results on kernel bench, where GEPA was able to generate better kernels, sometimes even outperforming the PyTorch baseline, which are human written. So, uh, like these were the two experiments we performed where like we used two completely different architectures. But I believe there are many other tasks where like many other, for example, like it can also be used with like you against unit tests to generate code patches, for example. So yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think, and I really love that paper you shared with me of your earlier work on of generating code and kind of outperforming a 500 billion parameter model with a 350 million parameter model using this kind of search strategy. And yeah, I know that our audience probably this idea of optimizing CUDA kernels and all that is probably so interesting. But maybe if we could just kind of broadly talk more about just kind of this sort of training at test time, and then come back into that kind of then come back into the code application particularly. But so kind of like training at test time. The idea is that like how do you then merge? Is that like the prompt that you just found by training on this test sample? Is that going to now be the prompt going forward? Like maybe just like operationally, I'm a little curious about how you imagine these systems that are training at, or like even if you're say updating the weights as well, just maybe like what do these systems look like that train at test time and then have to go, update the system with these new weights? Yeah.
Got it. So basically, given a batch of tasks, and like these are hard tasks, so definitely they require like they cannot be one-shotted. So what happens is JEPA will produce one like JEPA will generate some rollouts, and it will find that it'll get some textual feedback from the environment, like maybe some compiler error message, and it reflects on that, and it proposes another candidate. Now, while the liver that JEPA is using here is the prompt, what is actually changing is the solution that gets generated corresponding to this prompt. So, for example, what happens is in the first round, we saw that there was a compiler error message. Now, the prompt will include that instead of using this symbol, use the symbol or like something like that. And in the next round, the code will actually compile. But this time, maybe there will be a runtime error. There's like a division by zero error or some other kind of issue. And now this time, JEPA can actually see that feedback and iterate and say that, okay, use symbol Y, but also do not divide by this number because it's a zero at some point. And we see that iteratively as this happens, it uh, it identifies new challenges that the system is going to encounter, as well as at every step it is going to propose a solution to that challenge. So it's kind of like self bootstrapping data to train itself. And as we continue to do this, like especially given a batch of similar tasks, for example, in the kernel generation case or in the CUDA kernel generation case, we have, let's say, 10 PyTorch operators that we want to compile into CUDA. All of these tasks are highly related. So if I discover an insight that works well on task one, there is a high possibility that it will also work well on task two. So what happens is I use the rollout from task one to update my prompt, and then I use that prompt to generate the solution for task two. And whether this new insight worked on task two or not gives me further more training signal to identify what needs to be improved. So basically, this test time training paradigm is like something that JEPA adopts, and uh, like leveraging the LLM self bootstrapping capabilities, uh, we can generate increasingly challenging data for the LLM to train on. Yeah.
Yeah, amazing. It's like something I use to kind of dog through these agents with this podcast is I drop the transcript into I have like an agentic podcast to blog post writer. And so I'm thinking about it's writing a summary of say our podcast right now, and then it's using the LLM as judge. It's like evaluating the blog post, and then it's changing its instructions to try to maximize the LLM as judge reward as it's searching for the optimal summary of our podcast. And then I guess I would take those new instructions And so I guess kind of so then I have all these other podcasts that I maybe go and test my new prompt with. Like another thing, like with Weaviate with our query agents, we have all these tests now that we're like when if we're going to update, if we're going to say try to change our LLM or change our prompts, we run these tests. And so I guess like you take the new instruction and do you run it through all the tests and then like that's your new prompt. And I guess sort of maybe I'm just kind of curious what like the prescription is for like yeah.
Got it. Okay. So, like, GEPA works in both of these paradigms. One where we train on some training data set and then we want to generalize to a lot of new tasks. But this inference time or like the test time training paradigm, where so in the first, it's clear that we will use GEPA to generate a lot of prompt candidates. And at the end, we will do some kind of selection to identify one best prompt which is returned, and then that gets used. In the test time training paradigm, however, what JEPA will do is you give me these batch of tasks to solve. So for it starts with just one prompt, but as the JEPA process continues, for each of these task instances, we will have one particular prompt that works the best for this particular task, and JEPA simply stores that. And now, if on the one hand, you can simply store the outputs produced by these prompts, but also you can store these prompts because they represent all of the subdomains of the problem space that we are trying to operate on. So, for, building on the kernel generation thing example, there might be some tasks which require like a convolutional operator in CUDA, but there might be other tasks that require maybe like a summation operator. And so one prompt will be highly specialized to the convolution one, and this can work well for like 3, 4 task instances. Another might specialize to the summation one, and this could cater to another 3, 4 instances, and so on. So basically, JEPA tracks like the best prompt per test case, and you can store both the prompt as well as the output generated by that prompt.
Amazing. Thanks so much for that. My understanding just improved a lot. I guess like yeah. So like you might do this test time. So it's not necessarily to be like a continual learning type. It might be just for the sake of this instance, and then maybe you throw away the update. And then I'm motivated by there was this early work called model agnostic meta learning or the MAML algorithm, and I think a lot about maybe it's not, and it was about searching for what's the best, not necessarily the best weights for this task, but what are the best weights for then adapting the neural network to new tasks. And so I think like maybe with so maybe this complicates it quite a bit. Maybe as you're searching for the prompt in your training data set, you're not necessarily looking for the prompt that's like the best here, but adapts the best to your new instances. Maybe I've dug myself into a hole with that one. Do you think that makes sense?
That makes a lot of sense. I would say that this can be actually set up more as a train than generalize prompt. And definitely, like, I think the kinds of feedback you would use for each of these settings is going to be slightly different. In the second case, you will ensure that there is no task specific insights that the prompt captures. So you will write in your feedback something along the lines that try to extract lessons out of this. But if you're doing simply an inference time search where you just care about the final outputs, then you will try to mm, uh, provide a feedback which is as hyper specialized to the task as possible. So your code failed with this particular compiler error message, and like try to improve on this specific thing. So there is this difference that I see, and I believe that JEPA should be able to like work with both of these settings. Um, and I think it's like a really interesting direction that I'd be motivated to explore more research under. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so cool. It maybe motivates me if I'm thinking about like my workflow with like Cursor and how when I give it some instruction, it generates a solution. Then I'm usually giving it feedback on that solution, and the assumption is kind of that it's using the context of what it's generated already to update it, compared to maybe starting from the beginning with the feedback from what I've just said. Yeah, is that
Um, so, okay, yeah, that's amazing. So, basically, there is this very nice differentiation between whether you have access to past trajectories or do you need to generalize to completely new task settings. And I think this is precisely the difference between like the train then generalize paradigm versus the test and training paradigm. In the test and training paradigm, you can definitely leverage all of the past trajectories. But in the trained and generalized paradigm, you need to start from scratch, and like your prompt needs to be general enough that it can start from scratch and directly generate the solution. So, like for your cursor agent use case, I can imagine that there can be a background GEPA loop that runs like continuously, and every time you give it feedback, it iterates and generates like a new like generalizing a new generalizing prompt that starts from scratch every time you work on a new project. And then cursor can like build like a user specific persona, or like learn a user specific prompt that works well specifically for you. So I think this is like pretty exciting direction.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, that kind of like personalized per user type of, well, yeah, it's super cool. Amazing. So I'd really like to talk about sort of the experiments in the paper and maybe something, maybe talking about the LangPro benchmark and this kind of, uh, I guess it's like a collection of compound AI systems to then benchmark optimizers on. If you wouldn't mind just kind of explaining further what that is and how you use it.
Definitely. So, all of the experiments in our paper leverage LangProbe directly. LangProbe is a compound AI system benchmark where we have curated a large number of tasks and language programs that solve those tasks. A language program is anything that takes an instance of this task and produces an output corresponding to this task. And in the internal, it can do maybe just one single direct LLM call, or it can do chain of thought. It can leverage multiple modules in a stacked manner, like it can have a rack pipeline, it can do program of thought, it can do react. So there are a variety of LLM program architectures that the community has proposed. And our aim in LangPro was to capture a set of tasks along with the language programs that people have already built to solve each of these tasks, to then study which program architectures work well for what kinds of tasks, and so on. And on top of these tasks, we also see that DSPy proposes various optimizers, including GEPA now. And these optimizers can take any of these arbitrary like language programs that have already been built and optimize them. So LangProbe actually studies this question of, is there a cost performance trade-off that you can observe when going from one language program architecture to another, and going from one optimizer to another. And we found in the LangPro paper that in general, um, using better program architectures actually has improves both on the performance but as well as reducing your cost, and then optimizing them actually further reduces the cost while boosting performance. So like the Pareto frontier of the cost performance trade-off strictly improves when using like different program architectures and then different optimizers.
Yeah, it's amazing. I think this is such a deep topic. I'm trying to like scope the question well, but I guess like maybe if some so I think like this kind of idea of what are the kind of compound AI systems, what are the chains of LLM calls, kind of like I would kind of attribute this to like LangChain and Llama Index. It really like captured kind of a lot of people building these systems, their imagination about okay, here are some pre-built chains that help you understand like, okay, chat vector DB, and it has this configurable like summarization of the messages. Or, and then I really like the work from Stanford of Storm. Storm was like, it's like writing a blog post, and it's got this particular like six inferences. It's got this like debate pattern, and so I guess maybe even kind of aside from the optimizers, just yeah, this kind of topic of like assembling all the sort of compound AI systems, and then maybe contrasting this with the more open-ended sort of agentic function calling loop, where so I think we have like these two paradigms: people who like want to nail down their task very precisely, like in this way of thinking, or they want to just have I give my tools to my agent, and then it's just going to function call until it completes the task. And I guess maybe I just want to know your sentiment on. I think that topic is just as persistent as ever about how are people differentiating between these.
So I would say that um, the way I have been thinking about compound systems is, as a system builder, that these are two exactly the same things. In both the cases, we have a language model being orchestrated by some external control flow. Now, this external control flow can be very precisely defined by the developer, or it can be dynamically evolving as the LLM chooses to do in the agentic loop. But as an optimizer builder, as a system builder, to me, uh, these are essentially the same systems. They just need to be optimized in a slightly different manner. And in LangProbe, we actually try to capture both of them. So, for example, LangProbe has the AppWorld benchmark, which includes a React pipeline. And the React loop is being fully controlled by the LLM, where we just provided access to the various tools like Gmail, phone, messages, like all the variety of daily use apps that we have are provided as tools to the model, and the model's task is to achieve real world, like to complete real world tasks, like send an email to my friend inviting them for dinner, for example. So these are the kinds of tasks in app world, and langprobe actually tries to capture like very well precisely defined pipelines. For example, Baleen is a pipeline that we integrate into langprobe, but then also very general agentic pipelines with just tools like React in the app world case.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, and I guess for me it's I was a huge fan of the Gorilla work also from Berkeley, and this kind of and Berkeley function calling leaderboard, and we had done our own kind of research on querying databases with function calling, where we tried to design this like really complex tool that had all these like all the basically map all the SQL style operators into like function calls, so you could do any kind of mapping there, and then what we found with building our query agent like product is that we could decompose them instead of having it be this one gigantic tool. We could put like a router on top of it and then decompose it, and that resulted in a much more powerful agent. And so I think maybe that kind of like tool decomposition is maybe like a nice bridge for thinking about this open-ended function calling agent to then start of kind of pinning it down more so into like a language program type of, yeah, that's maybe one way I think about it.
I definitely agree, which I think actually also raises this very interesting and I think emerging research area of what language program architecture should you actually have. And I think people are now moving towards this paradigm where we want to automatically discover language program architectures. And I think a way to achieve that would be something like we start with a completely general loop, and then we discover which parts of the pipeline could use more decomposition and then specifically build decomposition there. So I think this is like a very interesting direction. Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think there was a paper from CMU that called Agent Workflow Memory that kind of had that flavor to it, and then that's kind of how I understand Simba so far. I haven't dove too far into it yet myself, to be honest, but that's sort of how I imagine it. And yeah, there's another paper from Jeff Clune, the creator of Math Elites, which was uh, automated design of agentic systems. So it kind of has this like you provide the language model with something like DSPy or LangChain or like Pydantic, and say like, okay, here's how you would create an agent, and then it's doing the design of the modules. And yeah, that's an amazing idea that I think is definitely going to be a big part of the future of this. Awesome. So maybe if we could dive into the results a bit. I think the headline, which is in the title of the paper, I think it's really amazing, is this kind of reflective prompt evolution can outperform reinforcement learning. Would you mind kind of explaining that further?
Definitely. So, reinforcement learning is like a great technique. It has shown a lot of tremendous progress. Like a lot of the AI progress is thanks to reinforcement learning. But what we find is that currently AI excels in tasks where we either have a lot of data or we have the ability to generate a lot of data by because of cheap rollout. So, like we can just run a trajectory and we can get immediate feedback, and then we can run reinforcement learning on this and it will learn well. However, we believe that the next frontier of AI tasks is going to be tasks where the rollouts are very expensive, either because they are slow, time consuming, or because they are simply monetary wise expensive. And this could include things like running very long running simulations, scientific experiments, and so on. So, the task that I started with, which actually motivated me to work on GEPA, was this task of generating code kernels for AMD and NVIDIA hardware. And one of the defining characteristics is like every evaluation loop needs to compile it, and it's a very slow rollout. So The next frontier of AI, I believe, is going to be these kinds of tasks with slow rollouts. And we should really try to come up with algorithms that can learn well from very few rollouts. And one of the things that we find is that all of the traditional learning algorithms just use a scalar learning signal that's observed after a very long trajectory. So there are very sparse learning signals. On the other hand, almost all of the LLM based AI systems can actually generate a lot of natural language traces, which can be reflected on. And GEPA tries to just use this insight to extract a lot of learning signal from as few as one rollout. So even from one like rollout that went wrong, along with some feedback on what went wrong, can let an LLM propose, like learn a lot about the task, identify what kinds of mistakes it's making, and update and like completely update its behavior. The other thing is also that natural language is like very dense. A very small instruction can like for example, a very small instruction can affect a very large change in the behavior of the system. For example, I can simply say to the language model that generate a short summary, but then in another instruction, I can say generate a long summary. And both of these will directly alter the behavior. So combining these two insights, one, that natural language has a lot of learning signals, and the other that very large amount of behavior update can be encoded into a very few words. Combining both of these is what enables GEPA to be highly sample efficient. And we believe this is what led to the results that we see, that GEPA can outperform GRPO in the tasks that we studied by up to 25% while using up to 35 times fewer rollouts. So um, I believe this is like a very exciting direction, and I believe reinforcement learning techniques itself will improve where they are now leverage natural language reflection to gather learning signals, and that can become like a much more sample efficient reinforcement learning algorithm as well.
Yeah, that was my favorite insight from the paper is that that coarse grain jumps along the optimization landscape. Everything you just summarized perfectly. Yeah, that idea is just amazing. It's and it also helps you think about. I'm pretty excited about these like better together. These other algorithms that are combining prompt optimization with gradient descent. I hadn't understood it before that before that insight, but now I get it and I can kind of understand the piece, and I imagine that would help a lot of people. Yeah, something else I'm really curious about. Andy Pavlo, he's like a legendary database professor from Carnegie Mellon. He had just given another talk about automated database tuning. And something at Weaviate, we have this HNSW vector index, and something we'll take people through is you have these hyperparameters when you're constructing this proximity vector graph about like the EF construction, max connections, these kind of black box parameters. And I guess I'm just really, I would love to marry these things with my interest in databases and then these kind of language models optimizers. And I'm curious, like, just if you're thinking about, I know you've done the work on the code, on optimizing the code, but like, I guess maybe like for tuning an HSW index, like not just tuning the prompt, but using this kind of natural language feedback to optimize and just maybe like broader black box optimization problems.
Thanks a lot for bringing this up. I actually wanted to highlight that while throughout this discussion we have been focusing on GEPA as a prompt optimizer, I want to really highlight that GEPA is a text evaluation engine where it can, any system that uses any kind of text component, including code. So code is text after all. So any system that uses any text component, JEPA can evolve that with feedback. So the way and this is actually something I'm actively working on. And by the time this podcast is up, first JEPA will be available on DSPy, but also this JEPA as a text evolution engine repository will be up as well. So what I'm currently actively working on is this paradigm where any system that you have, you can simply call JEPA with all of the text components in that system that you want to evolve. And what I can imagine is your HNSW index will have a core critical section loop. So you can simply provide that text snippet or some other text snippets from your code base as well. And uh, the feedback metric can be something like the performance metrics, or the initial rounds of feedback metric can actually just be the unit tests. for example. So just run the unit tests. Some of them will simply fail because GEPA generates some code that maybe does not compile, but in the next rounds, it will improve with that feedback. So simply provide a feedback from your environment itself that explicits all the things like error messages, performance parameters, or uh, you can actually suggest what kinds of feedback would make sense for tuning an HNSW-like system. But then JPA can use that to evolve the text, and it can propose a rewritten version of the HNSW critical section. So this is something I'm very excited about, and I hope to talk about more about it very soon.
Yeah, amazing. That's so cool. And you said I was hoping to anchor the podcast by asking you when will GEPA be available in DSPy and that sort of album release date.
Um, within days, and I expect by the time this podcast is up, JEPA should be live on DSPy already. Yeah.
Well, actually, I'm hoping to publish this on Wednesday, so we'll see if
Oh, I think so. I think so.
Awesome. Well, yeah, and so maybe coming back into that idea of extending GEPA not only for its use in DSPy, which is obviously super exciting, but also just broadly using it as an optimizer. I think that's just amazing, and yeah, it really motivates. Like now you need to rethink your reward signals a little bit. Like with HNSW tuning, you generally just get like the recall you have the brute force nearest neighbors, and then you have the stochastic neighbors from the graph, and that's all you get is the recall. So maybe having things like when we were looking into Acorn for filtered vector search, we were looking at particularly like the neighborhoods and kind of adding more signals about what's the status of the graph. And so I guess you now kind of redesign your loss functions to make sure you're getting more signal about the performance of the system, because now you can use it instead of just having a scalar reward. Yeah.
Definitely. I would say that one of the things that we also highlight in the paper is this feedback metric where you simply decompose. So, a lot of the RL environments actually aggregate multiple metrics into a single metric that's used as a reward. What JPy allows you to do is simply provide all of your feedback metrics, and it can do number one, the Pareto tracking of all of them, but also the LLM, when it is reflecting, can see the individual components. On the one hand, it can see did the recall go up or not, but did the recall go up at the cost of my performance? Did the recall go up at the cost of runtime? What's the trade-off? Should I try to improve recall further, or should I try to like simply providing the breakdown of all of these aggregate metrics can itself be provide a lot of diagnostic feedback to the LLM to reflect and propose even better candidates. So I think this is like a very exciting direction for JEPA.
Yeah, it's amazing. The idea of a language model to navigate the changes in the Pareto frontier. And I guess it just motivates me to ask if you're thinking about other kinds of ways to construct the Pareto frontier and then interface it with GEPA. Like instead of across your training samples, maybe it is like performance X input token length, maybe is something like that.
So, something that I'm working on with JEPA. So, first of all, I would say this is very much user defined. The user defines whether they care about optimizing the aggregate of these two numbers, or they what the trade-off is between them. The user should specify that. But at the same time, because of the Pareto frontier, what JEPI allows you to do is you can return multiple scores, and each score can be one of the metrics, like the performance and the cost can be two different scores. And the Pareto frontier can actually track each of them independently. So you can get one prompt that can get the best possible score, but then you have another prompt that gets like a decent score at a decent cost. But then so like there is this entire Pareto front of like at different cost levels you can get different performance, and JEPA can track and return to you all of these prompts that you can then leverage in your downstream application. But also, if you provide the way to aggregate them, if you provide the trade-off, then JEPA can select one best prompt that satisfies your trade-offs and return it to you as well.
Yeah, amazing. Well, broadly outside of Gab, even though I asked this question, it's almost always super influenced by by the most recent work. But just broadly, as someone working in the AI space, what future directions for AI excite you the most?
For me, I think the next, as I mentioned, the next frontier of AI is going to be about tasks where rollouts are very expensive. Like I'm personally very excited about these kinds of scientific simulations or code optimization. Code has been very close to the research I've been doing for a long time. But broadly, I believe that AI frontier, the next AI frontier is going to be slow rollouts. So I am excited about proposing better more sample efficient learning algorithms. GEPA was like a first step towards this, which only optimizes the prompts. But I'm slowly moving towards the space where we are jointly optimizing the prompt and the weight of the model, but in a sample efficient way. And the MMGRPO paper that came out recently is a step towards that direction. Now we are moving further in the space where we are leveraging even deeper, like MMGRPO currently does not directly leverage natural language insights generated on every rollup. And now the question is, can we do something similar to JEPA but for weight updates? And that's the next direction that I am personally excited about working towards. But more broadly, I think that um, this whole system, like AI systems, need to be very reliable, and we need to make a lot of steps towards achieving this reliability. And learning against verifiable domains is one, but also how do you work in domains where you don't have a verifier? So as you mentioned, using LLM as a judge to generate learning signal is another direction that I'm currently looking into. So yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing. Maybe one thing I'm curious about your opinion of, especially with like these kind of like rollouts are expensive, experiments are expensive, is maybe kind of like LLMs for experiment design, and maybe the use of like causal inference to say like organize these kind of ablations you're about to do. Yeah.
Um, I would say that this is like a very exciting domain. But one of the things is that's unclear to me is how do you verify these scientific experiments? There's a lot of work going on like auto ML where people are discovering new architectures because it's like it's we have a verifier there. We can run the new proposed model architecture and we can see what the score is, and like that acts as a direct feedback. But what do you do in open-ended scientific domains where like you cannot really conduct the physical world experiment? You need to run some simulation, but then how do you gather enough feedback from those simulations? So I think there are a lot of open questions here, but that's what makes this like challenging and very exciting to work on as well.
Yeah, well, Lakshya, thank you so much for joining the Weaviate podcast. This whole thing has been so exciting. It's been awesome to meet you and just hear your energy, excitement about all these things. Just really inspiring. And GEPA, I've had so much fun learning about this. There's so many cool ideas. So congratulations on the work and thanks again.
Thank you so much for having me here. It was my pleasure, and thank you so much for the kind words for Jefa.